Alright, so on this lecture, and like I said, we're not going to get very deep into it today, we're going to be discussing the somatic and autonomic nervous systems in greater detail. So if you remember back to when we talked about divisions of the brain, spinal cord, and overall the nervous system, we learned that somatic and autonomic nervous systems were part of the peripheral nervous system. So we're kind of studying peripheral nervous system stuff here. And we also learned about afferent, efferent, or sensory motor. Well, somatic and autonomic, we're really going to focus in on motor aspect of things. Okay, because the lecture that comes after this, that falls into our next unit, is more about sensory stuff. So in this lecture, we're going to be detailing more of the motor aspect of things. Before we really get into that, I just want to talk more about nerves, even though we just got done talking about the cranial nerves, which we just learned were 12 pairs emerging from the base of our brain. We also have 31 pairs of spinal nerves arising from our spinal cord, and we'll talk more about those in this lecture. Okay, I didn't do the definition of nerves in our last lecture, but you can see that here, which a nerve is a cord-like organ composed of both sensory and motor neurons, bound together by connective tissue that can transmit action potentials in opposite directions. Like I said just a few minutes ago, that's not always the case, like in the case of our optic nerves, which were sensory only, carrying impulses into our brain from our eyeballs. But like I said, most nerves are mixed nerves, which included some of your cranial nerves. All of your spinal nerves are mixed, containing both sensory and motor neurons, which means they send signals to and from the brain and spinal cord. And if we're talking spinal cord, to and from the spinal cord. Speaking of the spinal nerves, there are 31 pairs, like I said. We designate them by where they arise in the spinal cord. So there's 8 cervical, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, 5 sacral, and 1 coccygeal. Those are 1 pair, 5 pairs, 12 pairs, whatever. Okay. In some regions, axons from different levels of the spinal cord can come together to form what's called a plexus. And plexuses give rise to the nerves that then run out to feed or bring in signals from the periphery of our body, like our hands and feet. Okay. These nerves can be quite large, like the large nerve known as the sciatic nerve that runs down through our leg, very, very large. And that's because there's axons coming from multiple segments of the spinal cord. So you can see it ends up with a big old fat nerve. We learned last week about the structure of the spinal cord. We mainly focused in on that inner H, which was made up of gray matter. And we learned last time about the dorsal or posterior horns, which we learned were involved with sensory function. We also learned about the ventral or anterior horns, which were involved with motor function. Well, those parts of the spinal cord, specifically those 2 horns on each side, because there's 2 grays, or 2 dorsals, 2 ventrals, get their functions for these roots of our spinal nerves. Okay. Our spinal nerves come out of our spinal cord in a forked manner before they come together as one that emerges out of our spinal column. So we have a forked setup where one fork or one root goes to the back of the spinal cord. So that is known as the dorsal root. If you open that up, you'll see that the dorsal root or posterior root is made up of unipolar sensory neurons. Remember, most sensory neurons are unipolar in structure, where the cell body is off to the side as an appendage. And if you have a whole bunch of sensory unipolar neurons in a small area, because you're not going to just have one, this is going to become swollen. So that's known as our dorsal or posterior root ganglion. Okay. Their signaling is going into the back of the spinal cord, whereas the signaling going out of the front of the spinal cord through the ventral or anterior root is for motor because inside are motor neurons. These motor neurons can be stimulated directly by sensory neurons, or in like this case, a interneuron. They can even be stimulated by what we call upper motor neurons coming down from above, like from our brain, okay, carrying signals that then enter, or not enter, but synapse with this lower motor neuron that then carries a signal out to our skeletal muscles. If we're looking at probably the thoracic region of the spinal cord, we're also going to see those lateral gray horns, which is where you'll have the cell bodies of autonomic motor neurons, which also travel out by way of that anterior or ventral route. So it's very cool how this all kind of coincides with the gray matter that we talked about last time. All right, I think we'll just stop for there and pick up with Rami on Wednesday.